Hey there, Goblin Fellowship. I am the Goblin King, and I'm currently watching Az go on a diatribe about Vikings. It's great fun. Also, tonight we're going back to the Rings of Power well in tonight's Nutshot of Pop Culture Vultures. What a nutshot it is, too. Damn. So, you all remember that trash article on The Conversation that I did a video on last week? The trash article written by two supposed Tolkien scholars that wanted to make claims about Tolkien's supposed racism and anti-Semitism? Yeah, well, tonight we're going back to that article. We're not going back to rip it apart some more, though. No. Someone else, an actual Tolkien scholar, has already done a bang-up job with that. So, for those of you who might be new to the channel, the Monday before last, I covered this absolute dumpster fire of an article, written by two supposed Tolkien scholars that seem to know absolutely nothing about the man himself, who make unfounded assertions, or worse yet, push actual untruths about the man and his works, such as the assertion that Tolkien never clearly described the peoples inhabiting his world, a point which was thoroughly debunked by YouTuber Josiah Rises in a single tweet where he showcases actual pages from The Fellowship of the Rings, giving painstaking descriptions of several of the characters. Intertwining this with another debunked assertion that Tolkien was more interested in the metaphysical than the physical world, when there are entire appendices dedicated to the genealogies of several prominent characters throughout the books. Then pushing the idea that even if he had described these peoples, it wouldn't matter because adaptation. They also push that tired and legitimately racist narrative of evil orcs bad because they're black people. Yes, as I said, legitimately racist. Then, of course, they use that out-of-context quote from one of Tolkien's letters, where he stated that he wanted to leave a world open to, quote, other minds and hands to contribute to it, which, as Bounding into Comics pointed out in one of their articles on this essay, can also be easily debunked because Tolkien was speaking of another project entirely that he wanted to do in his youth regarding Britain's lost mythologies, the idea which ultimately culminated in Middle-earth, as far as I know. Basically, these two idiots push a lot of unfounded and outright untrue ideas out into the world with this pile of dog shit. Well, it seems other people more qualified than myself, and obviously these two ovarian cysts, have noticed this and have decided to push back against their mental gymnastics, which imply that Tolkien was a racist and that any fan that disagrees with Amazon's tripe is also a racist. Meet Carl F. Hostetter. This man is a real and legitimate Tolkien scholar. The most recent credits to this man's name is the relatively recently released The Nature of Middle-earth, as you can see in this fine picture here. Now, according to his bio page on TolkienGateway.net, Hostetter is a computer scientist for NASA and a key member of the Elvish Linguistic Fellowship. And that makes me wonder if JSG is a member of that fellowship. This dude even worked with Christopher Tolkien himself. I mean, he's got himself some nice solid accreditations right here. So, to say that he's familiar with Tolkien and his works is probably an understatement. Anyway, this dude comes into the comments on this trash article and just starts ripping it apart, up, down, and sideways. The first response to this article is here. I don't know in what order these things are posted on this site, but it seems like the most recent one, I think. Anywho, this is the first one you come to. Quote, the face of evil in Middle-earth is invariably non-white/non-European, unquote. Invariably? Oh? Feanor, Feanor's sons, Turin, Eol, Thingol, Ar-Pharazôn, Saruman, Denethor, and then there's this. Quote, it was Sam's first view of a battle of men against men, and he did not like it much. He was glad that he could not see the dead Southron's face. He wondered what the man's name was, and where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would rather have stayed there in peace. Carl then adds on Grima Wormtongue and Ted Sandyman to his list. Now, the so-called scholars do actually respond to good old Carl here, but you'll notice something kind of funny about their replies. They always make a point of replying with this trash response, directing him to an initial response, which we'll get to in a moment because it's a complete non-response. So we can actually read most of Carl's responses to this article just back to back, without actually having to read any of these bitches' responses, because they keep going with the same lame-ass reply. Though, you did have this dude after their third response that was just straight spitting facts. It made me laugh, so I had to include it. So here's Carl again. In fact, in the second age in which the series is set, and at the thematic heart of the history of that age, Sauron seduces the very epitome of the white/European-style peoples of Middle-earth, the Númenóreans. Just as he most likely seduced, lied to, and or coerced those of the Easterlings and Southrons who fought for him, as Sam's thought allows. Many Númenóreans, even prior to Sauron's influence, became arrogant and oppressive colonizers, and by the fall of Númenor, had committed many supremely evil deeds. So, again, it simply isn't the case that, quote, the face of evil in Middle-earth is invariably non-white/non-European, unquote. I think it would make for some very compelling storytelling for Amazon to show us Easterlings or Southrons that weren't corrupted by Sauron. Surely not all were. And or how Sauron corrupted those that came under his sway and fought for him, just as so many fair-skinned Númenóreans did. It certainly isn't clear to me that the, quote, white-non-white divide along moral lines, unquote, in Tolkien is quite so stark as this article portrays it to be. And in another response, at every stage of Tolkien's legendarium, elves awoke in the East. To that extent, they can literally be considered Easterlings, in geographic terms. In most tellings, men also awoke in the East, Easterlings. Or, in one telling, literally in Mesopotamia, and so the Near East. Now, it is true that Tolkien imagined that a great number of elves subsequently migrated to the West. It's also true that he imagined that some men migrated to the West. And it is further true that Tolkien attributed superior wisdom and knowledge to those elves that migrated west, and via their influence to men that migrated west and interacted with those elves. So, is Tolkien's supposedly stark moral line, as claimed here, drawn along racial lines, i.e. pigmentation, which of course has nothing at all to do with race? Or is it perhaps the case that is drawn along geographical lines due to closeness of contact with the migratory elves? In other words, is it possible that Tolkien thought that Easterlings and Southrons were more susceptible to Sauron's corrupting influence, not because of the color of their skin, but rather because of their separation from elves? Which, in fact, in late writings Tolkien faults the Valar for causing. And if so, isn't it just projection and confirmation bias to attribute the situation to racism? In other words, does doing so reverse cause, geographical separation from elves, and effect, pigmentation in Middle-earth? And here's one of his final responses that I saw. I think it would be great if certain Tolkien scholars could discern in and credit Tolkien for the subtlety and nuance that he clearly possessed and expressed as a writer and thinker, instead of projecting their own ideas of what, quote, a man of his time, unquote, quote, must, unquote, have thought and believed. Really, reading Tolkien in an informed and charitable light, i.e. giving him the benefit of the doubt by accepting all that he said in light of what we can know of his upbringing and beliefs, it's clear that he was not racist as regards to the world of the 20th century. Nor is he racist as regards his fictive prehistory. He does have a firm moral stance as regards both histories, but that stance has nothing at all to do with race. His moral stance is open to anyone of any race, and was rejected by many, even of the supposed superior race in his fictive world, just as it is in ours. If you thereby want to indict Tolkien as a moralist, well then, guilty as charged, but charging him as a racist you're really just rejecting his moral beliefs and implying that no other races share those beliefs, which, well, just look to Africa. It's only after the fourth thing you come to that Carl's said that these anal warts actually have something else to say, and it's this. This long-ass thing that talks about papers they've written and having to, whip out their assumptive metaphorical dicks and talk about how they're doctors or doctoral candidates. I can tell you one thing right now. I work with doctors and associate with doctors in my job on a daily basis. Medical doctors. Most of the doctors I know are fucking morons. Putting that doctor in front of your name or PhD behind your name doesn't make you smart. All it really means is that you can memorize things and regurgitate them back out on demand. Everyone is so impressed by that PhD that they forget that there are literal rankings in any class. You have the top of the class, and you always have the bottom of the barrel. The ones that barely squeaked by. So, no, I'm not impressed just because someone happens to have some sort of a degree, especially if that degree isn't something worthless. Anyway, this was their response. The main objective of this piece is to contest the notion that POC either do not belong in Middle-earth or should play no other roles than Easterlings or Southrons. The question of whether Tolkien was racist, personally in terms of his own ideological stance and attitudes, is a different one from whether his mythology reproduced harmful racial stereotypes and tropes, some of which were commonly also reproduced as well as contested by many progressive writers of his generation. Seriously, you can just hear the whiny cryy bitch right there. One of the authors of this article, Dr. Dimitra Fahmy, has already addressed the "was Tolkien really racist?" question in a nuanced and balanced way in a 2018 article in the very same media venue as this one, The Conversation. Linked from the above article, but here is the link again for ease. You will find there and in her book a wider discussion of Tolkien's own personal stance and on the wider topic of racial stereotypes in his mythology. This article focuses on the forthcoming TV adaptation. The other authors, Mariana Rios Maldonado, work on encounters with the other in Tolkien's work is ongoing and will be available publicly once her PhD thesis is completed. There is also a wealth of scholarship on Tolkien and racism for a couple of decades now, of which you may want to inform yourself before adding your own arguments, if you wish. Some of the main arguments and approaches are summarized in Dr. Robin Ann Reed's bibliographic essay on this. Kind regards, Dr. Dimitra Fahmy and Mariana Rios Maldonado. Like I said, seriously, you can just hear the fucking bitch. And again, they don't actually answer any of his arguments at all. Oh, we talked about these issues in other papers. Go read those. No, bitch. You put out this shit article blasting fans and blasting Tolkien and making all kinds of assertions against both his moral character and his fans' moral characters because they don't like what a piece of shit corporation is doing to virtue signal and revise what Tolkien wrote. This backlash is coming from all fans of all colors and ethnic groups. You need to answer for the garbage that you put out, but you can't. You know damned well that you can't. You know that, between the two of you, you have all the brains the gods gave an amoeba, and you don't have any valid counter-arguments to Carl's totally valid points. They also seemingly have no fucking clue who they're talking to either, since they basically tell him to educate himself, which is a typical wokeoid response to anything they can't actually argue against. Carl's response to this was pretty fucking good, too. I am, at least, quite as familiar with everything Tolkien wrote, and with the particulars of his life and times, as the aforementioned scholars, and so, at least, quite as well equipped to form and explicate opinions on these and many other matters in Tolkien studies. Thanks. Kind regards, Mr. Carl F. Hostetter, and no one else. Anyway, I thought that was fucking hilarious. But what else do you expect from these trash scholars whose only skills are trying to tear down what other better people have created? The types of people that slime and ooze their way into the mainstream spotlight and get called on only to validate the dumbass choices of Amazon. I mean, it's pretty telling that Amazon got rid of Tom Shippey and instead turn to these two window lickers. Anyway, that's about all I have for you on this one, goblins. Let me know what you thought in that handy section down below. While you're down there, maybe you can locate these two idiots' brains. They seem to have lost them somewhere. Also, if you like what I'm doing, think about joining the Viridian Horde by crushing those like and subscribe buttons. I'll see you on Monday with another pop culture teabagging. See you then. Lates.